take so much of your time. Right Honorable Patricia Scotland, thank you for joining the Avalon Daily on this interview. So, most of the Commonwealth member states are grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic. Will the leadership of the Commonwealth be looking at a strategic collaborative effort in mitigating or containing the spread of this virus?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely, because one of the tragic things for all of us is this virus came out of the blue. Nobody was prepared for this pandemic. There are many things that we've been aware of in the last few years, and the Commonwealth has absolutely committed itself to work together in solidarity. As you will know, there are 54 of us in this Commonwealth, coming from 5 different regions, from Africa, from the Caribbean, from the Pacific, from Asia, from Europe, and of course, the thing that binds us all is that we have a similar history, we share common language, common values, common institutions, common parliamentary process. And this comity, this coming together, has always been something which was very strong in our 54, very strong in our family. And so when this pandemic hit, it was a shock for all of us. I think there's not one person, not one family in our Commonwealth which has not been affected in one way or another by the pandemic. And I'm not just talking about the medical or physical or health aspects, but when we think about what is this doing to our economies, the way it has closed down the space. And we also know that we're all also facing now the climatic trauma, which is coming with the climate crisis. So we're seeing the terrible damage being caused in the Pacific by the storms that have come from the Cyclone Harold, and now Australia is being hit. Then we saw what's happening across Africa, the desertification, the drought, then the locusts, and now the floods, which are taking lives in Eastern Africa. And now, right now, today, we are fearful because we haven't just had the onslaught of the biggest cyclone that has ever hit the Bengal, the region in both Bangladesh and Pakistan and India, which is the West Bengal region. But now we hear that India herself is going to be hit again, potentially today, in Gujarat. So this is very serious. And on top of all that, there are threats now where we're anxiously bracing ourselves for the beginning of the hurricane season in our Caribbean islands. And these islands are small, they're fragile, and they are really being battered. So this whole issue is a time when we as a Commonwealth, as a family of 54, we have to come together, we have to help each other, we have to support each other. And I think there's never been a greater time of need for multilateral action from all of us. And I'm so proud that Nigeria is bravely doing her part.
I'm glad that you talked about multilateralism here, because the Reuters just published a very damning report on the state of Africa's healthcare infrastructure, especially with pertaining this global pandemic that has struck Africa. It talked about the fact that most African countries do not have enough ventilators. African countries do not have enough intensive care beds. In Nigeria, for instance, the report stated that we have just about 350 intensive care beds for a country with close to 200 million people. So again, my question is, will the Commonwealth be looking at collaborative ways that it could support African countries? Even though at the moment, we've not really experienced such a spike like we've seen in Europe and some Asian countries. But should we get to that point, are there plans by the Commonwealth to see how they can support African countries with intensive care beds, with ventilators, and helping with their medical infrastructure?
Yeah, yes, and the answer to that is absolutely yes. If you look at what has happened since this virus came to plague all our lives, it has been a real wonderful thing to watch our Commonwealth come together. But let's just look at Africa. The African Union has galvanized, led by Cyril Ramaphosa, and of course, the work of the African Union chairperson, Musa, has done a great job to pull Africa together. But I think it was also important that ECOWAS identified President Buhari to lead this work on West Africa in relation to the COVID virus response. Now, why did that happen? Because we know that none of us, it doesn't matter how big we are, how small we are, none of us have the power to face this virus on our own. But I know that these issues in relation to the capacity of the health system in Africa was already at the forefront of our minds. And we have to recognize that Africa has also led, because of the tragic experience that Africa has had with the Ebola epidemic and other such diseases, it has built in a resilience and a response capacity and mechanism which has not only helped Africa, but has helped other regions to know, how do we respond to this? So what we have done, and you will have seen it by the Commonwealth Health Ministers meeting coming together in the margins of the World Health Assembly to say, what will we as a Commonwealth family do? Last year in 2019, our health ministers were prescient. We were already saying, how are we going to respond if we have further epidemics as we did with Ebola? How will we respond if we have a pandemic? We were fearful of a pandemic. We were hoping we would never have one, but we were also already preparing. So for the last 4 years, since I have been Secretary General, our health ministers have been concentrating on universal health coverage, because we know that if we are to respond to any sort of epidemic or pandemic or our general health issues, we have to strengthen universal health coverage. And our ministers had already agreed that we in the Secretariat should concentrate on creating a platform, a data platform, which would enable us to pool data in relation to our medication and our equipment, because we did not want any country, any individual to be left behind. And we knew already that many of our countries were finding it very difficult to get access to the medication that they needed, access to the equipment they needed at a good price, because some of our members were saying, because they were small, because they couldn't procure in bulk, that they were sometimes spending 30 times more than other countries who are bigger, better. And if you look at India, India has 1.35 billion people, and they are the greatest producers of generic medicines. So we were looking at, how do we share, how do we procure, how do we make sure that all of us can take advantage? So the fact that we were already doing this is so important, because we weren't starting from ground zero. We were already on our way. We were already looking at how we can digitalize, how we can share. And if you go on to our innovation hub, you will see that we were already trying to pool the innovation from right across our Commonwealth. And just look at what Nigeria has done, because when this started, there was a real difficulty in terms of having sufficient manufacturing for Nigeria to do her own PPE. I think there were only 3 or 4 manufacturing sites, but Nigeria has now repurposed so many of those manufacturing sites to produce more PPE. So we've got, I think, now in Nigeria about 17. This has happened in just about 3 months, because the pandemic became apparent in Nigeria only in February, and we're now in June. So this rapid redeployment has been very important. But the ability that Nigeria has to catch up is also helped by the comity, by the sharing of all of us throughout the Commonwealth. Nobody knew how to respond to this pandemic. Nobody even understood what this pandemic was. What was coronavirus? How do we identify it? How do we know what it looks like? How will it manifest itself? And we know this is a very wicked disease. It cloaks itself in so many different ways. And unfortunately, one of the main ways we've been able to understand what it's doing is by the ability to carry out post-mortems. So from those post-mortems, we have understood better. All our countries are now joining together. We are sharing what has worked and what has not worked, because all this is new. So this collaboration is really, really important. And every time someone has learned something, good or bad, that is something we have to share so that no other country will have to suffer what others have. And Nigeria is working very hard and working with its other African brothers and sisters. And so, for example, we are so proud of what West Africa has done. Look at what Ghana has done in terms of identifying the COVID genome. Now, that hasn't just helped Africa, that's helped all of us. And what Nigeria is doing in innovating and developing as fast as you can, the PPE and the repurposing, we will allow that to be shared with others. But what the Pacific is doing, the way they have developed the three-pronged approach, and they have, of all the countries who have been able to keep COVID out, 10 of them, I think, are found in the Pacific. So what our Pacific countries have done is helping us. The Caribbean has been remarkable in the way they have locked down. But look at India with its 1.35 billion people. India has managed to keep the death rate down to just over 4,000. Compare that to what's happening in America, where you only have 330,000 people, but you have more than 100,000 affected, and the death rates going sky high. It's about 80,000 at the moment, but it's climbing. So it's allowing all of our 54 to come together to share information. And you'll see how the United Kingdom, who has a very highly developed universal healthcare coverage, and look at how they have been tragically impacted. So all of the learning from our developed states, our developing states, our small states, our medium states, all of our 54 sharing that data and making the commitment to do it together is critically important.
I like the fact that you consistently talk about collaboration, and that you talk about not leaving anyone behind. And you know that the COVID-19 virus has not only affected health systems across the world, it's also affected economies tremendously. And so while you have, other countries in the Commonwealth that can afford to inject trillions of dollars as stimulus packages into their economy, some other countries, especially in Africa, do not have the luxury of injecting that kind of money into the economy as palliatives or as support for businesses. So I'd like to ask, knowing so well that this virus has not only disrupted global trade, it has caused so many organizations to shed weight, to lay off staff, and for so many small businesses that have closed shop. Is there anything that the Commonwealth will be doing to target the economies of these countries to help stimulate small businesses and to help big businesses also survive and continue to thrive, even as we find a vaccine for this virus?
No, absolutely, because, we have three crises. So in many ways, it is an unfortunate perfect storm. We have the impact of the pandemic and the desperate stress that it will put on all our economies. We then have the climate crisis, which is coming right now. And then on top of that, we have what some are describing as an economic tsunami coming our way, because our countries have had to make some hard choices. Our countries have chosen to save lives, and that saving of lives has meant the lockdown of our economies. And that has itself had consequences. Now, many people are saying we have no choice but to save lives, because if we are alive, we can create wealth tomorrow. If our population has no life, then we have no wealth. There can be no wealth without the preservation of our health. So, accepting that these are things we cannot change, let's look at the consequences. The consequences are that globally, we are likely, they think, according to the figures we're getting out of IMF and others, to lose between 1 and 2 trillion will be the shortfall expected in global income this year, including 220 billion gap for developing countries, and that's excluding China. Now, we have, therefore, also to look at the impact that this lockdown has had on our oil producing countries, of which Nigeria is one. 90% of Nigeria's income comes from oil. So the reduction in the price of oil is going to have a depressing impact on the economy of Nigeria. So what are we going to do? We know that the Commonwealth are 54 countries who represent 2.5 billion people, have a 19% advantage when it comes to trade. If we trade with each other, it's cheaper, faster, easier. We also know that we trade 20% more with each other. And we have two things going our way. We have, firstly, the fact that all of us are signed up to the World Trade Facilitation Agreement, all are 54, which means that we can work together to reduce the barriers and make it easier for us to trade because we share the same Commonwealth, common law situation. But also look at what Africa has just done, because Africa has created the African Free Trade Area. Ghana is the secretariat. Now it's going to launch, and I understand that there's been a little hiatus because of COVID, but that agreement is very powerful. If we can come together, and the Commonwealth Secretariat has helped both African Union, and we stand ready to help the new Secretariat in Ghana to come together to increase the modalities to make it easier for our small and medium-sized businesses and our general trade to trade better. If we can create the same modalities for the implementation of the African Free Trade Area, as well as the Trade Facilitation Agreement, if we can make those interoperable, we have an opportunity to enhance the trade right when we need it. And the reason I say that's important and why I have hope that if we work together and we can collaborate, we can do this, is we already have an example of what happened in 2008. Because if you remember, there was the post-trade in that period when we had a last financial crisis. And after the global financial crisis in 2008, the Commonwealth exports in goods grew by around 8%, compared with only 5.5% for the world, and over 2010 to 2018. So that's an example that we can use. We can say, how did we do that? How do we replicate it? And how do we make sure that small and medium-sized businesses are protected? But we're also doing something else. Our lawyers across the Commonwealth have come together pro bono, and it started first in Kenya. And we have created something we called Kulburi, which is the Commonwealth legal instrument that we are going to use to help our member states to address the regulatory and statutory changes that we may have to bring in on a temporary basis to help small and medium-sized businesses and our businesses. Because if you look at our regulatory and statutory structure, it may mean that if we do not amend some of them, many of our businesses are going to go out of business. They will become insolvent, and some of the directors may also become disqualified because they did not take steps and were not aware that this pandemic was coming. And if you leave our rules unamended, many of their businesses will be brought to an end and many of the directors will be disqualified. So we have come together across the Commonwealth, pooling our best lawyers to come up with draft regulatory and statutory provisions, which, if our members think it's needed, if our parliaments think they would be helped by it, these will be draft provisions which could be brought in temporarily. Now, we've got to be very careful when we do this, because we know that the conditions we currently have, the provisions in our law at the moment, is to keep us honest, to keep us transparent, and to impact on corrupt practices. So we do not want the COVID pandemic to be used as a cloak by those who are corrupt to take advantage of it. But we have to give relief to those good businesses, those honest people who were not ready, and none of us could expect them to be ready for what has happened. So we are working on those two. So if we can keep our businesses going, if we can reach out, particularly to our women, because Professor Kobia from Kenya is currently the chair of the Women's Affairs Ministers meeting, and she has said quite clearly that she's worried that, bearing in mind women are the majority of small and medium-sized businesses and are very highly represented in the informal sector of our economy. We don't want those women and young people, it's women and young people in the SMEs. How do we protect them? So we are coming together as the we're coming together as the women ministers meeting, and we're going to have a women's ministers meeting to look at how we protect those women and keep their businesses going. But I hope you will also have seen the economic series that we have been playing since the beginning of last month, from I think it was about the 10th of May until the 12th of June this month, to look at all those aspects of the economic recovery that we will have to come together. But this, again, is all about collaboration. So there's a lot for us to do, but a lot that we can do if we stick together and we work as a 54-pronged team. And I believe we can do it.
So the final question I'd like to ask you is about the stance that certain governments are beginning to take the world over as a fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic, when they noticed and realized that their supply chains were over-dependent on a few countries. And so these countries are beginning to take some sort of an isolationist stance, or what you'd rather call a nationalist stance to global events. So I think the question I'd like to ask you is, do you have faith that will come out of this COVID-19 pandemic to a more globalized world, to a more multilateralized world, where we will collaborate more and not depend on ourselves alone, wherein countries are now looking at decluttering themselves from China and setting other countries that they have so much relied on for their supply chains and their manufacturing. So do you think that after this COVID-19 crisis, do you have faith in globalization, and do you have faith in multilateralism going forward?
I have utter faith in our Commonwealth. I have utter faith in the multilateral stance that we've taken, and I have faith that we will remain open. If you look at what's happened in the last couple of years, there has been a retrenchment and a worrying trend towards a more nationalistic approach. But look what our trade ministers did last year when they came together in Marlborough House. The Commonwealth trade ministers made a very strong statement. They were pro the WTO multilateral system. They said they made a total commitment to the rule of law. They wanted the markets to become open and remain open. And that commitment was a stark statement to those who wanted to detract from the need for multilateral participation. And if you go back to what the Commonwealth of 53 countries, now 54 countries, now that Maldives have rejoined us, said then and say now, is we are quintessentially multilateral. If you look at what the health ministers said when they came together in the margins of the World Health Assembly, they were calling out for partnership, they were calling out for collaboration, they were calling out for multilateral activity. But I think we need to be very clear. What has the COVID virus taught us? The COVID virus taught us that we are interdependent. My health and the health of those I love are dependent on your health and the health of those you love. And in order for me to keep my family and those I love safe, I have to keep your family and those you love safe. For so long as we continue to live in a globalized existence, which means on this planet, we are interconnected. We are interconnected on climate, we're interconnected on trade, and we're interconnected on health. And we know from this terrible experience that the only way we are all going to survive is if we share our knowledge, we pool our know-how, and we implement that which we know together will work. So I think if anyone wants to say, why are we remaining multilateral? Just look at the reality that each of us have experienced in the last few months. And if you look at what has worked is when we have collaborated, when we have supported, and when we have realized that we are truly interdependent. Every single human being on this planet shares 99.9% of our DNA, and our humanity has to come first. So I think that what we're seeing is that need, that really palpable need for us to stay together. And I am so proud of our Commonwealth. I'm so proud of our 54 because our Commonwealth has not hesitated, not for a second. If you look on our Coronavirus Resource Center, where we've pulled the innovation that's coming not just from our 54 countries, but from all our accredited organizations, every single one of us is saying to every single other member of our family, what can I do? How can I help you? How can I lift this burden with you? And how can you help me? And that is where our strength lies. Our strength lies in the family of 54, sticking together through thick and thin. We have done this for 70 years. When we have needed each other, our family has come to each other's rescue. And this is what your president is doing. This is what your government is doing. This is what your civil society is doing. This is what your people are doing. But this is what the 2.5 billion people of our Commonwealth have to do if we are to survive the tsunami, which is this pandemic, the tsunami, which is the coming at us climatically with the crisis, and then the financial. We are going to have to innovate. We're going to have to share, and we're going to have to be smart, and we're going to have to deal with this terrible onslaught because we're going to have to find a new way, a new normal to deal with the debt, to deal with the crisis that's coming. And we can only do that if we do it together so we don't leave anyone behind. And as Secretary General, that's the commitment that I've made to all of our countries. None of us are going to leave anyone behind. If one of us dies, all of us are affected. So this is a fight, but we are up for this fight. We've done it before. We will do it again. I think history isn't made by accident. History is made by each and every one of us making choices. And those choices have to be the right choices. Just as 70 years ago, we looked at our great-grandparents and our grandparents, and we said thank you to them because they made the right choices. We now have to make the right choices today for our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, because they will look back and they will say of our generation, what did you do when the fat hit the fan, when this terrible pandemic happened? What did you do? And we in the Commonwealth, I know, are going to be able to say, we stuck together. We didn't buckle, our knees did not bend, and we linked arms and we survived. And I think that we've already done so much to make sure that the next generation will be able to say that they can be proud of what our Commonwealth is doing right now. It's taken courage and determination, but I am proud that that courage and determination is here now in this generation, just as it was in the generations before us. This is our time, and we have to stand together.
Fascinating way to end this conversation. Honorable Patricia Scotland, thank you so much for joining me in this interview. We're proud of the extremely wonderful work that you're doing at the Commonwealth. Nigeria is proud of your leadership and will continue to support you to do more in the coming months and in the coming years ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.